Lyney, or Lyney, however you choose to say his name. I want to preface this by saying that first and foremost, I do like this character. I like his design, I like his kit, I like his gameplay, but I'm not necessarily concerned with how he feels to play. I want to instead talk about how he is as a Fontaine character and whether or not he lives up to the expectation for what a brand new character of a new region should be. Now, I'd like to remind everybody, the first technical new characters we got of each region were as follows. Kazuha was our first Inazuma-based character, but if we're really being blunt, when Inazuma was released, the first character on launch was Ayaka. Our first Fontaine, or our first Sumeru character was Tignari. He was alongside Kale. These were two Dendro-based units. They introduced a whole new element with us, but prior to that, we had Kuki Shinobu and Yae Miko, who were more or less dependent on future Dendro reactions. Now, our first Fontaine unit is Lyney, and for general comparison, this is my Lyney. He's on his brand new Hunter set. His talents are 8, 8, and 8. He's level 90, and he's using an R3 signature weapon, so he is heavily invested into. His stats overall are 60 to 24, which translates to about, I believe, 96 to 24 with this set active. I played him with Mono Pyro. I just run him around with the Yelan just because she's a bit more comfy to use in certain scenarios, specifically when I'm just going in overworld or fighting pyro-resistant bosses. Now, I don't want anyone to mistake this. I don't think he's a bad unit. If you are looking at whether or not you should summon for him, the primary reason I would say to avoid him is that his team is very expensive. This is an example of one of the better teams you can run with him, which is a full Mono Pyro team. Of course, if you have a signature, you don't necessarily need to. You can instead slot in a Zhongli over a Dea or a Kazuha over a Zhongli if you want that grouping capabilities. I tend to run this, or I tend to run something like, where is he? And then I slide in with 2 Pyros and then a grouper who buffs the damage of the team and then one who keeps everybody alive. That's essentially it. Why do I say it's expensive? Primarily because Zhengling is one of the stronger units in the game and she's tied with Bennett. So these units overall are pretty good. The core of your team is pretty good. If you're running Zhongli, these 3 units are pretty versatile. If I'm just looking across my roster, as of right now, my Zhongli is used in my Sino team. Raiden National uses 2 of those units. Eula Raiden can use any one of those units, including Bennett. Hu Tao also wants my Zhongli. Ganyu wants my Zhongli and my Bennett for Melt. Yoimiya wants my Bennett and my Zhongli for protection and survival. And Zhao wants the exact same. The core of that team is incredibly valuable, and this means that Lyney has to essentially equal or match the other teams based on damage alone to justify taking these units away. And I don't think he does. I think he's a fun character. I think his charge attack playstyle is nice. I think doing 2 charge attacks, getting a stack, and then being able to use a skill to regenerate HP is quite nice. I think it's an overall fun and fluid playstyle that doesn't leave you feeling on field too long like you would if you played Ganyu. The downside is, even though his entire kit is based around something like Mono Pyro, it's essentially increasing your damage, and it's a much better variation of Nilo's teams in that it doesn't restrict you to one team and instead just incentivizes you to go with one team. The downside is, Nilo's teams didn't require some of the best units or the most versatile unit in the game. His do. And his wants your Bennett. He wants your Zhengling because your Bennett is essentially keeping both the bonuses of attack for each of these units alive, but he's also healing your Lyney so he can use his passive properly and gain stacks. So then in that case, if this is such a fine team composition, why do I say it's bad? The problem comes to, he is an expensive unit who wants to be invested equally across all talents, and he's fighting for the position of a Pyro Bow user. Well, the other Pyro Bow user we had was Yoimiya. She's also really good and slightly less expensive because you only have to level her normal attack because her burst and her skill don't do that much. But as a charge attack, he's fighting with your Ganyu, he's fighting with your Tignari, and it leaves him in a weird position because those 2 units have access to different team compositions. You have Aggravate, where you have Hyper Bloom theoretically if you want to try that with somebody like Tidari, but you have Melt and Freeze for Ganyu. With him, it is Mono Pyro. It is Mono Pyro. And it's Mono Pyro. Even though you can slide in a Kazuha and you can slide in a Zhongli, you're just relying on Pyro burning damage or Pyro burning consistently without Dendro. And so as a result, you don't get the elemental reaction, so it feels kind of samey. Now, is he a bad unit? No, I don't think so. I think he's incredibly fun. I think he's a strong unit, but I just don't think he really incentivizes or really tells us anything about what Fontaine unit as a whole will be about. Yes, you can count the Numa aligned energy or Numa aligned damage here and there. Where is it? Somewhere down here. And yes, that happens every so often. But outside of him and Hydro Traveler and his sister, who's somewhere down here, having that effect, they don't necessarily tell you anything about what Fontaine characters will be. If I'm looking at Ayaka, If I'm looking at Kazuha, Ayako was about elemental burst. She was entirely reliant on that, and energy regeneration was kind of a big factor for essentially every Inazuma character. Why? Because the Archon gave so much energy to everybody. Even Yae Miko had a 90 cost burst. She's, I believe, the only other character aside from Raiden who has a 90 cost burst. Liyue, almost everybody wanted shields. Even though shield impact wasn't necessarily as strong back then, shield impact was a thing that was growing. Zhao wanted a shield. Hu Tao, Ganyu, all these characters wanted to be shielded up pretty consistently. Whereas with Sumeru, we got a whole new element, so everyone knew it was going to be about Dendro. Lyney doesn't necessarily have anything that incentivizes you to play a specific team or invest to a specific way. He's not necessarily someone unique like, I'd say hypothetically, Hu Tao or Nilo that boosts an entire reaction or change one, or fully HP based like these two units. Instead, he's a charge attack character who feels a lot like the other charge attack characters, who scales the same way. Even though he loses HP, he heals it up, and we already have Hu Tao who does the exact same thing, theoretically at least. And so I think he's a great unit, but I think in terms of his investment value, I think in terms of his pull value, mono teams as a whole have a lower ceiling in my opinion. Even with really, really strong units like Zhengling and Bennett, they have a lower ceiling than a Melt team, than a Dendro team, than a Hyper Bloom or Bloom team. It's why Xiao teams aren't necessarily as good as something like a Ganyu Melt team or a Hu Tao team or even a Raiden National. Because you're not necessarily running these teams just for one unit's damage, you're running them all with the purpose of proccing a reaction. And you lose out on that with Animo DPSs and mono elemental teams. Even Geo is a bit of an iffy scenario with that. So I think he's a fine unit. I think if you like him, you can pull for him. I like him, I like his design, I want to go for cons, I want to just R5 this weapon at this point. But I think he's a good unit. He just doesn't feel like he should have been the debut for an entirely new region. Because he's not offering a unique kit that is something we haven't seen before. He's not offering something unique with his gameplay, with his mechanics that we haven't seen before. Yes, it's artifacts that incentivizes healing or draining your own HP. Cool. But we already had that. And we already had that here. And we already had that with Kugi Shinobu. So it's nothing new. And I think that's my biggest issue with him. Is he good? Yes. Should you summon for him? If you like him, go ahead. You're not missing out on much. If you don't, he's a good unit. He's not a bad unit. He's not broken. He's just, and I personally like him. So if you pull for him, go right ahead. I just think as a new unit, as a debuting unit, he should have been different. Or at least should have been slightly more unique, in my opinion. He could have been the first double unit. Like, let's be honest here. How many of you were expecting something like Lyney and his sister to be able to be swapped in and out with a skill or a burst or whatever? I don't know. It could have been unique. Childs has arguably the most unique kit in the game alongside Nilo. But hey, that's just my opinion. Tell me yours. I'll see you next time.